welcome everyone. Thanks for coming on this third day of the SharePoint conference and getting up early in the morning to attend this session to cover kind of a big topic, which is the Microsoft 365 platform. I'm Mike Ammerlaan. I work on Microsoft 365 developer ecosystem marketing, which means I actually cover a lot of products across Microsoft 365. Now, your first question might very well be, what is actually Microsoft 365? Well, Microsoft 365 really started off as a combination of, let's take Office 365, all the things that you know in there, of course, including SharePoint, but then included things like Windows 10, and also included our enterprise mobility and security products, all in one package. So you can go and get Microsoft 365 for your organization, and with one price, and away you go. You've got the best of everything that Microsoft has for an enterprise in the cloud available to your organization. So it really did, yes, in fact, start as a way to go, buy all of these products together. But we actually do see that there's going to be these growing synergies across products. The way that you develop for SharePoint, for example, should have a lot in common with how you develop for Windows, or developing a security panel for your organization should leverage a lot of the same tools and APIs that you would use for connecting to Outlook and Exchange. So yes, we did start Microsoft 365 as this packaging exercise, but we do think that over the fullness of time, a lot of these products will start to fuse and seam together. Now, in this talk, you don't actually have to have Microsoft 365 as a product. If you just have Office 365, you'll still learn a lot about all the different products and some really key extensibility scenarios. Now, before I actually worked in marketing, I was a program manager on the SharePoint product once upon a time in my career. So all of the things that you've seen in other sessions that they're saying, don't use that anymore, that's bad, it was wrong, it was really weird, those kinds of things, I was the program manager for them. So things like feature definitions and developing SharePoint Server with .NET, I used to be the program manager for that. But now I've got a little bit of a broader remit. So in today's session, we're going to talk about Microsoft 365 and sample a number of the ways that you can customize and extend it. When we think about Microsoft and we think the broader level perspective of, what does Microsoft have that as developers you can take advantage of to build better experiences, of course, the major thing that comes to mind is Azure. There are so many different services in there. There's, different components. There's, ranging from AI products to data storage to web application services. So of course, Azure is really the foremost thing for developers to take advantage of when building products. However, we do think, and Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, also thinks that there's this other big opportunity with Microsoft 365 across Office, across Windows, across enterprise mobility and security. Now, there's also a big opportunity with Dynamics as well. So it's not just two platforms, it's actually three. But suffice to say, there is a big opportunity with Microsoft 365. And a theme that we're trying to work towards is helping developers be a bit more people-centric in how they build applications. What we mean by that really is that when you think about applications in the enterprise, a lot of the struggle or a lot of the task to date has been really just getting applications out there and on and across devices. We've gone through an evolution in the past 10 years where basically smartphones are ubiquitous. People have plenty of horsepower in their laptops. But it's kind of a solved problem of how do you take all of the applications that you want to go build and put them specifically on all the right devices. There's always room to improve. There's always going to be new devices. But the actual task of building applications is a bit under control. The bigger problem that you have actually in enterprises is the people in terms of what they're doing and how we can make them most efficient. One of the things that, in my line of work, we deal with a lot of research. One of the things that really is kind of shocking to me, and certainly it's reflected in my work, is that, over the past 5 years, we're all kind of collectively in twice as many meetings as before. And we're working with teams that are more diverse in terms of geography, in terms of different generations, different styles of work. And so, the pace of collaboration is actually accelerating. In a sense, we're doing all kinds of, collaboration activities that are good, but it's important upon us, in our organizations to kind of think through the process of how do we make the tools that people use, the tools that they use to collaborate with others, that much more effective and efficient and, able to really connect with people. So there is this idea that, okay, let's, rather than sort of starting with the application necessarily and thinking about how do we get it onto all the devices, let's start with the users, the tasks that they're doing, and how do we actually improve their overall workflow. And so I hope through some of the things that we're going to see in this session and a lot of the recipes, if you will, that I'm going to share, hopefully you get some ideas about how you can actually improve the overall effectiveness and collaboration that happens inside of your organizations by building with and on Microsoft 365. So, when you think about it, a lot of us who are here in this audience, they're building applications. You do start with, okay, I need to go deliver, for example, a inventory management tool or an expense tool or a business workflow out to my users. Typically you think about doing that as, I'm going to go build a web application. I'm going to add some components that's going to connect to data. We're going to have business logic in a third tier. All those kinds of ingredients in how you traditionally build out an application. But we think that Microsoft 365 can actually add a lot to this process. Starting with the tools that you use and using some of those tools on top of Windows. We're on a mission to make sure that when you develop applications, not just for Windows, but also across platforms, we're working to make sure that you have the best-in-class tools available to you on top of Windows. So it starts with Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code, which we think are great tools for developers to start building their applications. Visual Studio has been on a transformation journey for the past 3 years, 4 years, in terms of making sure that you can build great Android applications or great iOS applications and become a one-stop shop for creating applications. A huge thing that we've actually just announced a couple weeks ago at Build was that we're improving our Linux support inside of Windows. In fact, we're shipping a full Linux kernel inside of Windows so that if you're developing and you want to use the full capacity of Node.js or NPM, you can basically have a no compromises way to get at it in a Linux kernel, if you prefer, directly inside of Windows. So, for example, a lot of times people are using Macs, which are great, and using a lot of development. And one of the features that they really love about it is the fact that it provides that deep core Unix kernel. Well, there's a Linux kernel that's now going to be included as part of Windows that you can take advantage of. And so that brings about better things like, for example, better Docker container support if that's what you're looking to do, because again, we have that sort of deep integration of a Linux kernel in Windows. And the other thing that we actually announced last 2-3 weeks ago was an upgraded and newly introduced Windows terminal. So for the developers in the room, you're writing code, you're doing a lot of commands, you're sort of working with your files. The terminal is really kind of the heart of how you actually work with those bits of code. And so we actually have a new Windows terminal that's available that just makes it a much more modern experience, takes advantage of all the powers of Windows, but then it also makes it very easy for you that as you're developing, you can actually switch back and forth between, for example, your Linux shells or PowerShell or those kinds of tools all in one place, all in one-stop shop. So it starts with, with Microsoft 365 using Windows, creating applications we hope is going to be a much more streamlined process. But next up, we're always working, not just in Windows, but across Microsoft 365, really to kind of make the tooling and the experience as best as possible using your favorite frameworks. We realize that these days, for example, if you're a web developer, there is no one framework to go to anymore. When I was a program manager working on SharePoint, it was kind of like, okay, we'll just support ASP.NET, and ASP.NET is the way that people probably should go build applications, and that's the one web framework to kind of rule them all, so to speak. But of course, today, smash cut, 10 years later, 15 years later, we live in a world where there's a lot of different JavaScript frameworks. There's a lot of server-side frameworks. There's Node. There's ASP.NET. There's a dozen more. And no one developer has the exact same preferences probably in terms of how they want to code compared to another. And so across Windows, across Microsoft 365, wherever possible, we're just trying to embrace frameworks that come about and make sure that you can develop with them in a seamless way. So React Native, for example. This is the React framework. It came from Facebook, but it's now kind of more of an open standard, really popular for JavaScript development. And now there's kind of a native equivalent called React Native that allows you to use JavaScript, allows you to use the React, the markup format of React, to actually build applications that span across platforms. And one of the things that we just announced with Windows was that we're going to have full first-class support for React Native inside of Windows as well. So if you're building applications that span across devices, React Native, if that's your choice, great, we're building great support for that. Of course, we also have Xamarin, which is a .NET based way to build applications across platforms. So if you're like me and you love writing code in .NET, which I do, Xamarin's a really great choice for that because it provides a lot of great abstractions across platforms while giving you all the familiar tools of Visual Studio and .NET. Of course, a big announcement that we've also made is that we're moving Microsoft Edge, our web browser, over to the Chromium engine. So if you're a web developer, there's no need to necessarily have to kind of have a separate test pass and a separate validation for Edge for using its current in-market engine. That engine, while being very good, always had some inconsistencies on standards compared to Chromium, which is kind of this open source standard that sits behind the Chrome browser and a number of other browser experiences. And so we think that this will make your life easier as a developer, and again, just streamline the process of actually deploying applications. We're also looking to bring Edge to Mac OS as well. In fact, I think we already have a preview out for that. So there can be a great browser experience using a consistent engine across browsers. Similarly, we have Visual Studio Code, which is a great web development tool, also across operating systems. And then, like I said, Visual Studio has also got some great tools for building across applications. So from a philosophy perspective and from a tooling perspective, you'll see this probably reflected in a number of different ways. But across Microsoft 365, we're just trying to make it easy to bring your own frameworks, bring your own choices, and try to accommodate as much as we possibly can. Another great example, in SharePoint, with SharePoint Framework, we worked with the Google team to kind of make sure that Angular had, a pretty good representation with SharePoint Framework. And so, the Google team was coming out with Angular Elements, which is a great, more portable way to work with Angular inside of applications. Again, trying to embrace, whatever frameworks that developers find popular, make them work in Microsoft 365. The next thing that you can do to actually improve your Microsoft 365 experience is to bring in context. So we've got our application here. It's an inventory tracker, let's say. But we think that it gets better and becomes more useful and more streamlined for people if you can bring in information from your organization like the people that people are working with, or maybe a task list, or maybe a set of related files to an inventory item. So a common scenario, for example, is I'm building an inventory tracking tool. I need to, if something is out or something is checked out, so to speak, if I need to go start a workflow to go recover that item, I want to know, is this person in the office? Who's this person's manager? What team is this person on? And so by bringing that context in of what organization does a person work in, you can actually make the application a lot more easy to use. You can make it more streamlined, more effective, and efficient. And so the way that we have to do this is something called Microsoft Graph. So if you haven't heard about Microsoft Graph, who here has done some graph development? Okay, about half of you. Microsoft Graph, I'm going to give you a little shortcut. Think of Microsoft Graph as really just a REST API for getting at data in a consistent way across Microsoft 365. Now, that's not strictly true. We'll talk about some other things that go beyond REST APIs. But Microsoft Graph is really this REST API for getting at some common data types that are commonly used in your organization. And we think that if you take that advantage of that and actually add in things like tasks and people and files into your applications, you'll save people time, you'll add more context, you'll streamline your workflows, and we'll show you a little bit of what that looks like as well. And then the final way that you can leverage Microsoft 365 to build more people-centric experiences is to not just go beyond your own application that you're building, but also go into other experiences where work is done. So as I mentioned, we're all doing more collaboration, at least that's what the statistics say. We're all working with more teams in different time zones all across the world. And so chances are you're probably spending more time in Outlook and Teams. And so by taking your application experiences, your inventory tracking management tool, and for example, bringing it into Outlook or bringing it into Teams to make certain workflows easier to work with, you can actually improve people's outcomes and make them more effective. And we'll show a little bit of how that works as well. So that's the general idea of how you can sort of bring Microsoft 365 together. Now, what I'm going to do is show you some different tools and some different ways that you can take advantage of those tools. My hope here is that I just start a spark, that maybe you'll find out about something that you haven't heard about before, but ways that you can extend tools like Teams and Outlook and Word and Excel and PowerPoint, SharePoint, use Microsoft Graph in interesting ways. So let's start with Microsoft Teams. So Microsoft Teams is, as you probably all know, is this chat-based tool. It centers around this concept of a conversation. It centers around the concept of an open conversation. In other words, if I'm going to assemble 10 people, rather than starting a whole bunch of email threads where I have to go include people and maybe I missed a person or maybe somebody joined the team later, I have to ramp them up to speed and bring them in, bring them into our conversations. Instead, the idea is use Microsoft Teams, create a group for your team, have your chat out in the open inside of that team, have all your assets and all your files in one place, and in doing so, you'll make your team more effective because people can just see the ongoing conversations, they can jump in, they can pitch in, and they can see everything all in one place. And so that's the general design idea of Microsoft Teams. Now, Microsoft Teams, when it was introduced 2 years ago, was really designed to be extended. It was designed to be customized. And so, even from day one, there's about 3 or 4 different ways to go extend Microsoft Teams, and we've actually continually, throughout the process of Microsoft Teams, tried to make it more extensible and customizable. The idea for this is, I'll show you what the idea for this is, which is that we think that Microsoft Teams just becomes much better and much more useful if you can actually go and customize through it. So, in this particular example, imagine I am a doctor at a hospital, right, or a clinician at a hospital. My main job is working with people, is working on their health outcomes, working with all the different electronic tools and equipment that a doctor needs to go work through. How I chat with my colleagues is not of prime importance to me inside of my hospital. Working with office content is not, that's not my main job as a clinician inside of a hospital. And so having Microsoft Teams for those clinicians is really actually pretty nice because it actually coalesces all of my chat tools, all of my files, all of my content in one place so that I can focus on my patients and what has to happen over the coming week and those kinds of things. It provides a lot more centralness and focus for those clinicians. And so yes, of course, you're going to have your tab conversations here where you can sort of chat about patients and those kinds of things. We've got all our different hospitals and our different hospital districts over here on the left-hand side in the team picker. Microsoft Teams integrates with SharePoint. So, for example, if we need to share files, there's a files view inside of Microsoft Teams, which comes from SharePoint. But, as I was mentioning, Teams really gets better when it's more customized. And so, one of the things that, when we were actually working with hospitals, one of the workflows that we saw that they had was, inside of a hospital, sometimes you'll have issues, like maybe there's an increase in infection rates in a particular operating room or something like that. And so a hospital wants to have a very good process for actually bringing together the right people to go form a squad to go deal with that issue. It's kind of like a scrum team or that we have. And so they'll assemble these teams, they'll meet on a weekly basis, they'll talk about their top level issues, they'll talk about ways that they're making progress. And in a lot of hospitals today, that's just a fairly manual process. It's a whiteboard with sticky notes with people just looking at the sticky notes and kind of, dealing with them week over week over week. And so when we worked with some hospitals, we said, okay, what if we brought this inside of Microsoft Teams? We took advantage of the conversations and the files that sit inside of Microsoft Teams, but then we also started to do things like build customizations. And so one of the ways you can customize Teams is through something called a tab. So in this case, we've taken this hospital and we've actually added a tab for issue metrics. So in a hospital where they're very metric driven, this is a custom dashboard where we as a bunch of doctors and clinicians can actually set some KPIs like our overall infection rate. We can go track them. And this is really just a custom web page with data that actually comes from SharePoint that's actually kind of our workboard for how we deal with some of the metrics that we see inside of our hospital. So this is a custom dashboard where people can go work through things. Of course, you can also do things like add Power BI into Microsoft Teams. So in this case, if we want to track our metrics more broadly, we can do that through Power BI. Another common tool that gets used inside of Microsoft Planner is a task board. And so one of the things that we have here is, okay, when you see these metrics, you're going to want to start to come up with some ideas for actually addressing those metrics and make sure that they get tracked and they get followed up on and that people complete them. And so you can add a planner board into Microsoft Teams. But for the clinicians that we're talking to, they actually wanted something that was a bit more streamlined, that made it easy for them in the spur of the moment to actually add an idea. So one of the other customizations that we have inside of Microsoft Teams that we added for this hospital was a way to say, if you're a doctor, if you're on the go, you've got your mobile phone, you've got your Teams application, you can simply come into Teams and you can talk to this thing called the HuddleBot for our healthcare huddles and say, I have a new idea. like so. And what this bot will do is actually come back to you and say, okay, let me go collect some information from you about that new idea. And so this actually embeds a card inside of your chat. And so I can say, add more gauze pads like this, start an order. This actually uses something in this chat called an adaptive card. So it's actually a way to kind of embed a full form, as you can see, inside of your chat conversations. I want to go impact this metric we have called retention rate, and I'm going to go assign it to Janice, and we're going to start, fairly soon. And so what this bot's going to do behind the scenes is it's actually going to go create an idea in that planner board that we were just looking at that will get followed up on. We were actually working with a hospital in Texas that's using these tools, and they actually liked the bot a lot. And in fact, they wanted to give it a better name than just HuddleBot because they really kind of thought it was a personal way to kind of interact with, their huddle process, essentially. But anyway, the idea here is that, for these clinicians, for these doctors who are on the go, they don't want to have to deal with a lot of tools. They don't want to have to go, surf and sort of go find information. And so by taking Teams and then adding customizations to it, like this bot, like the custom metric board that you saw earlier, we actually make it a much better tool for them, much more focused, and hopefully it helps them, spend less time searching, collaborating. They can focus on getting things done. So that's Microsoft Teams. Again, it is really designed to be highly customizable. There's a number of other ways to customize it beyond the tabs that I just showed you and the bots. The tab is probably the foremost way to go customize it. And so behind the scenes, when you're actually building a tab, really a tab is just a website. So we're just taking maybe an existing website or existing tool and actually hosting it inside of Microsoft Teams. Of course, you're going to want to do some changes and some updates to maybe adopt the look and feel of Microsoft Teams to make sure that it works well inside of a tab. One of the things we're doing is we're actually bringing tabs to the Teams mobile experience. So you're going to want to make sure that this experience is responsive and works well inside of a mobile device. Now, building a tab has a JavaScript SDK with some lightweight services if you want to do some customizations. The big news that we've been developing over the past 5 months or so is a way to take SharePoint Framework, which you can use to build extensions for SharePoint, and actually bring them into Teams so that the same web parts that you build for SharePoint will just work inside of Microsoft Teams as well. And because SharePoint Framework has a lot of great tools, a lot of great scaffolding, if you want to leverage your skills and you want to leverage that scaffolding and just building a Teams tab from scratch, you can do that as well. We'll talk about this later, but SharePoint Framework really is becoming this standard way to develop more and more things across not just SharePoint, but Microsoft 365, and Teams is really a big way to go do that. Now, one thing I just want to show you very briefly, let me go back into my team very quickly. Sorry about this. Let me go switch to the right application. Now, when you actually want to go and build an application, as I mentioned, the heart of your tab is really just a website. But one of the things you're going to have to do is package some metadata that goes along with your website that registers your website with Microsoft Teams, gives it an icon, gives it some metadata about who created this thing. And so to do that, there's a tool called App Studio. Now, App Studio is an app for Microsoft Teams. It's a little confusing. But if you go into the Teams store, if you go search for App Studio, you'll go find it there. And what App Studio really does is it makes it possible to go and sort of automate the process of creating your manifest so that really the process of bringing a tab into Microsoft Teams can be as easy as you build your website, you customize it, you make sure it works, and then you can use this manifest editor to actually package it all up and get it over into Microsoft Teams. So just wanted to point that out. Okay, so that's a little bit about Microsoft Teams and getting started with tabs. Now, of course, the most commonly used application that we see in Microsoft, at least in Office 365, is Outlook. Email is still an essential ingredient for how you work across your company and across organizations as well. A lot of email is kind of the start of workflows. It's probably the world's most popular CRM system. It's probably the world's most popular file storage system. You can't really beat email for how ubiquitous it is and how essential it is to people's work. So one of the ideas that we have is, well, maybe there's a way to actually make email more effective. So what I'm going to do, let me go switch over, is go to my inbox. Let's go over to Microsoft Teams again. So now I've got a different team here for our Contoso marketing team. And so we've got this workflow here that when somebody in our marketing team wants to go talk to a supplier, this is a custom tab that we have, one of the things they can go do is they can say, I want to go connect with that account owner. I want to go reach out to the supplier and talk to them, but I want to sort of go through our account owners that are assigned to them. So it's kicking off a little bit of a workflow. So when I do this, and I'm starting it inside of Microsoft Teams, that's going to go kick off that workflow, and it's going to result in a new email sort of landing inside of my inbox. Now, this mail in my inbox is kind of that workflow and that request for contact with one of our vendors. So you can see here, there's a form that I submitted earlier. And what you'll see, or let me go select the one that just got sent. So what you'll see here is that, this is not just any ordinary email with a bunch of text and a bunch of to-dos and those kinds of things, but what's actually at the top of this email is essentially a little embedded form. So within this form, what I can actually do is rather than having to go into my email, go open up a separate web tool, go log into that website, go find the right place where I can go respond to a request, what I can do with an actionable message instead is actually just go respond in line and say, OK, sounds good, like this, spelling mistakes and all, and click approve. And what will happen is that within this email, it's going to go submit it back to my service. My service will go process that request. It will go do some graph-based follow-ups. And then my card that's inside of this email will get updated to actually reflect the fact that I filled out this form, I approved the request, and now it's done. And so now with actionable messages, there's this way to embed small little tiny forms directly inside of your email. So what's the idea behind this? Well, we think that it's actually a super efficiency gain for those people if you can really skip the process of them having to go outside of email, go open up that website and do all those things. If you can actually get the form done in line, yes, you're probably saving maybe 2 minutes of time, but that 2 minutes adds up over the course of a week, and it also helps people stay more focused and on working through their email, working through their triage processes. So we've been working, for example, with a number of different vendors to actually start to integrate their actionable messages into the messages and notifications that they send. So for example, one of them is GitHub. GitHub, that when there's a new pull request or a new comment inside of a GitHub, it will send an actionable message with different details that you can go fill out. At Microsoft, for example, we've actually went ahead and implemented some actionable messages for processes inside of Microsoft. And so one of those processes is actually a custom SharePoint permissions approval process. So like your organizations, one of the tasks that commonly happens is people want access to a SharePoint site, and you want this workflow where somebody can go request access, and then the site owner can say yes or no, and they can move on. And previously, this would take you out to a website. The website, would have all the right radio buttons and ways to go approve the permission request. But what we did instead is we took those SharePoint permission requests and wrapped them in an actionable message. And what we found was that when those access requests came along, the click-through rate was actually increased by 4 times, and the overall sort of actionability of it increased by 82%, or increased to 82%. And so the benefit of this is pretty obvious. If you've ever requested permission for something that you need fairly quickly, but the owner maybe misses your email or is gone over the weekend and doesn't see it in time, the difference between getting your approvals in a matter of hours versus a matter of days can actually make a big difference in terms of the projects that you're looking to get done. And so we found that just this efficiency increase improves, again, overall approval times, increased the engagement by 4 times. The other one that we actually did at Microsoft was we took our expense approval process. When I'm done with this trip, I'm going to go submit my expenses and my hotel bill up to my boss. My boss is going to take a look at it and say, yeah, maybe that sounds good. I approve, and then the funding will sort of hit the right credit cards and bank accounts and those kinds of things. But also we have invoices, and invoices are things where you could have tens of thousands of dollars on the line with a vendor, and you want to make sure that they get paid on time, because if they don't get paid on time, there will be late fees and different financial penalties that get incurred. And so what we did is we took that expense approval process, that invoice approval process, we put it in front of an actionable message. Again, just a form inside of your email rather than a separate website. And we actually found that the approval time went from 144 hours on average for an expense report So that's what, like 6 days, essentially. That sort of decreased it over to just 17 hours. So now expense approvals, on average, we're going from 6 days to about 17 hours. In fact, it was so successful that we actually stopped the pilot because the compliance folks came in and said, wait a minute, are people actually like looking through the expense reports carefully? But yes, we made sure that they were sort of carefully considering their expense reports. They saw all the receipts as attachments in their email, and it's just a raw efficiency improvement. And in a world of late fees and late invoices, it's actually going to save us money over the long term as well. And so users as well, they really appreciate this. They find it to be kind of a magical experience. We actually are now just bringing actionable messages to your mobile clients, to Outlook Mobile. So if you're on the go, if you're in the grocery line and you want to go approve some expense reports, you can just open up your inbox, you can see the expense report, you can click approve, and you're done. You don't have to open up maybe a crusty website on your phone and sort of re-sign in and all those kinds of things. So actionable messages, just another way that we're hoping to make the people in your organization more efficient, and so bringing your workflows and working with it can be a way to go. Now, let me just show you very briefly how this was developed. I want to show you a little bit of code. So an actionable message really is just a bunch of JSON markup. So let me go show you the tool for this. There's actually, if you go to adaptivecards.io/designer, there's actually a way here that you can go define custom adaptive cards. And so, as I mentioned, adaptive cards are really just, in some regards, kind of in a form that you embed inside of Mail. So what you can do is, you can visually design a card here. I can drag and drop and move different elements around. If I want to move this picture around, I can go do that as well. You can see that there's a number of different component types you can use. If I wanted to embed a video, I could go do that inside of my adaptive card. And so this is just a website where you can go design them. Adaptive cards is a cross-Microsoft format, so it works not just for Outlook Actionable Messages, but it's a format we use in Windows. It's a format we use in Microsoft Teams. So if you get good at building adaptive cards, it's something that you can actually use in a number of different contexts. But what you can see is that once I'm done designing this adaptive card, it's really just a bunch of JSON markup that you have over here that really comprises my adaptive card. Now, if you come into how this was developed, I've got my Azure function here, which is how I built that simple workflow. And really, the way this works is I've got some existing code that's going to go send out some emails. And it's going to go send out this email over here. Let me go scroll down just a little bit. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit squished in my windows. Let's go do this. Sorry. Basically, this is some pretty standard email sending code. I've got an HTML document, which is my email. I've got some email code, which will go send it. And really, the only thing I've done here is I've taken that JSON markup from adaptivecards.io and embedded it inside of the head of my email. So now my email that I was just sending out is adaptive cards powered, such that when it's viewed inside of a client like Outlook that knows what to do with adaptive cards, it will show it. If it's viewed in a client like maybe Gmail or Outlook Express or something, you'll just see the HTML mail. So you have that kind of fallback experience. After you do this, there's a bit of an adaptive cards registration process if you're going to ship it globally or inside of your company to register adaptive card providers. And after that, you're really off to the races. So developing adaptive cards, I've seen teams do it in the span of an afternoon, at least get the fundamentals working. It can be, like I said, a really quick and easy way to improve overall productivity. Now, let's see. Okie dokie. So coming back, Outlook, like I said, has some really deep usage amongst users. I know I spend probably hours inside of Outlook a day. So you can also extend Outlook in some other ways as well through something called add-ins. So add-ins are basically ways to pop up custom HTML on the right-hand side of Outlook, so that when you're editing emails or when you're reading emails, you can bring up custom tools, custom applications. You can pop up dialogues that help users work with those emails. So very commonly, CRM applications, they've got ways to take incoming emails and associate them to a contact. Task management tools have ways to take incoming emails and convert them, for example, into a Trello task. So there's a number of tools that integrate with Outlook as well, in addition to actionable messages. Now, one other place where we've got add-ins is inside of the other Office applications, Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. So just to show you a little bit of what this looks like, I'm going to come inside of Microsoft Word and open that up. Let's go find it. Okay, over here. So now I've been a doctor, I've been a marketing supplier, now I'm going to be a lawyer. So in this case, as a lawyer, I've got this contract document over here, which is kind of my bread and butter as a lawyer. I've got to make sure that this contract document works really well. And so one of the tools that a company called Litera has developed is something called Contract Companion. So Contract Companion is an add-in for Word. And when I open this up, it's going to open up a pane on the right-hand side of Word. I'm already signed in. And I'm just going to go hit the refresh button. And so what this is going to do, it's going to take the content of my document, and it's going to go send it to the Litera cloud. Litera's got a number of different AI providers and tools. And so what this is essentially kind of a grammar checking tool for my legal document that uses legal rules. And so, for example, one of the big things in a legal document is terminology and making sure that you're using a precisely correct terminology. So for example, where I say generally accepted accounting principles, it's going to make sure that I as a lawyer sort of make sure it gets reviewed for the right language. One of the other big things is just making sure you get your names and dates correct. So for example, in this case, I say, okay, we're going to do this by April 2nd or April 12th, 2014. Well, that day is a Saturday, so there may be an error there because typically legal business doesn't get done on the weekend. And so these are all just some different examples of ways to go extend it. Another good one is just your defined terms. Anytime you use a capitalized letter, like affiliate with a capital A, that's an official term in your legal contract. You want to make sure that you're using that properly. And in this case, I guess affiliate is something that's defined, but it's never used inside of my document. So just another kind of grammar error, if you will, for my legal documents. But all this just to show you that you can extend Word to add custom tools like Litera, like Litera did, to make your processes easier. So, one of the processes that we have at Microsoft is our year-end financials and our quarterly financials, and making sure that we have our financial statements that are correct. So we've got a number of tools that we've put out as open source that actually allow you to make sure that the data that fills out our quarterly reports is always up to date and always in sync with the actual data from our back-end systems. So just some other ideas for that. So how do you actually go and extend Word and Excel and other applications? Well, it turns out it's almost exactly the same as how you would extend Microsoft Teams, which is you can extend these applications with essentially websites. You can build a custom web site. You can register it with Office through a manifest file, an XML file that you can go design. There's tools in Visual Studio for creating them. And then once that happens, you can actually deploy these new add-ins into Word. Either users can individually go and add add-ins inside of Word, or your administrators can deploy them across your organization. So if you've got one tool that everyone in your organization needs to use, you can go deploy it. It also works across platforms. So whether you're using Mac OS or whether you're using Windows or whether you're using Word on an iPad, it also works for that as well. And so this is just another place where if you've got maybe some existing tools that you've developed for the web, you can actually bring them into Office applications and build some really great tools from that. Now, one way to go get started for this is through a tool we have called ScriptLab. So ScriptLab, just to show you how to get started, if you go to the Insert tab of Office, you'll see your Insert add-ins, and there's a number of different add-ins here that you can go download. We have a marketplace, so you can get add-ins from vendors as well, like, for example, Lucidchart. But in this case, you can go search for ScriptLab, and you can go add it. Once you add it, you'll get a custom tab on the top of your ribbon. And so in this case, what ScriptLab allows you to do is actually experiment with writing JavaScript code that runs inline inside of Office applications. And so in this case, I've got a simple macro here. It's inside this JavaScript run function. And what it's going to do asynchronously is it's going to take the existing range, the thing that the user has selected in Excel. It's going to get that selected range, and it's simply just going to go change it over to the color yellow. So I'm going to select the range. I'm going to click Run. I'm going to say Run side by side. Got it. I'm going to go open up the Run tab. So what's going to happen here is this is kind of like the output of this application. And so when I click this button, it's going to run this JavaScript code over here. And so now, as you see, no surprises there. It's actually taken that selected range and changed the fill color to yellow. And so for Office add-ins, there's a very rich JavaScript object model for actually working with documents, working with content. We're at the point, I think, with Excel, we're almost getting to parity in our API set in the web-based version of our add-ins compared to the older COM and VSTO-based version of our add-ins. So there's some really powerful things you can do with web add-ins in Excel, and we're always working to improve like our Word APIs and our PowerPoint APIs as well. So Script Lab is really just a tool that, if you want to experiment and see what's possible, Script Lab has a number of different snippets that you can load, so it can be a great way to go explore different kinds of things that you can do inside of Office applications. So just to show you how you can get started in extending Office applications. So that was a little bit about Office. Just to make it clear, typically when you're building extensions for Office, a lot of them will go build out these right-hand panes that you saw me open up Latera inside of, Contract Companion. So typically people will open up those tools on the right-hand side. Inside of Excel and PowerPoint, you can actually embed these tools directly inside of your PowerPoint or inside of Excel. So in this case, there's a Bing Map add-in that will connect to data inside of your spreadsheet and plot it onside of a map. So this is a web add-in we have. The other thing is that they can also extend the ribbon as well. So if you just want a button that runs some JavaScript or that pops up a small dialog, you can do that as well. So those are just some of the common ways that people have for extending Office applications. Okay, so those last three sections were about how you can actually extend our out-of-the-box tools to go customize them and go bring your application. But a lot of times, as I showed you earlier, you can actually make your existing applications better and more rich as well. And you can do that with something called Microsoft Graph. So Microsoft Graph, as I was mentioning, just think of it as a REST API for connecting to SharePoint data, OneDrive data, Excel data, Azure Active Directory data, calendars, tasks, all those kinds of things. We're trying to unify everything that used to be a separate API into one API endpoint, and that's Microsoft Graph. So just to show you how this works, let me come over to a very brief demo. So as I showed you earlier, people like bots, people like interacting with bots, and Teams is a great way to host them. So one of the bots that we've actually built is something in Teams called a graph bot. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to come back to my Contoso marketing, and I'm going to start a conversation. So what I can do is inside of my team chat, or you can do it inside of personal chat, I can reach out to my graph bot, and I can say, where is my next meeting? Like this, and I can start to ask it questions. Now, bots have a great framework for taking natural language, English queries like this, and breaking it down into a set of, here's the intent of what a user's trying to do. So a lot of the bot framework will handle the hard parts of dealing with the complexities of human language. It boils this down into an intent, which says, okay, what he's actually trying to ask is, where is my next meeting? And in this case, GraphBot returns, okay, your next meeting is this weekly stand-up, in conference room 3/88. I can say, okay, find, let me go say, GraphBot, go find all my PPTX files like this. So I can issue these commands that work across not just my calendar, but also things like the set of files. So in this case, what it returns is kind of a very brief display of a set of PPTX files that I've been working with. It returns the ones that I, in particular, have been working with. So I've been working on an SPFX community event and making a safer workplace. And so it can return those kinds of things. The other thing that Graph has is a bit of insights as well. So watch what I can do here. I can say, schedule a meeting with Ben. Now, in a company like Microsoft, we have 150,000 employees. There's probably 300 Bens at Microsoft, just to make up a number. And so one of the things when you have this kind of query like schedule a meeting with Ben, the first thing you really have to do is actually go disambiguate which Ben are you actually referring to. And so what we've needed to build for Microsoft applications is a way to take all of the Bens that are related to a person, not just in our Active Directory, but also in our emails and our contacts, and stack rank them based on how frequently do you interoperate with all these different Bens to come up with an ordered list of here's the Bens that are most important to Mike. right? And then what we did was we actually took that insight of, here's, based on how you interact with people and the content that you're creating, here's the list of bends that are relevant to you. And we made that available as an API. And so in this case, what GraphBot is doing is it's actually taking that sorted list of bends in my company. It's going to return them to me as an adaptive card. I can say, go schedule a meeting with Ben Summers. I want to do that on July 2nd at 8 a.m. in the morning. There's another API inside of Microsoft Graph that actually will take a set of people, in this case me and Ben, and actually say, give me a list of calendar appointments that work for the both of us. So it does all the work to do all the calendar math to say, OK, here's an open slot and all that kind of thing. So just another API that's available in Graph. I can do that. And now my meeting's been scheduled. So GraphBot, in this case, is really just it's really just a bot that kind of wraps a whole number of different existing Graph APIs. So let's take a look at the code for that really quickly. Graph, as I mentioned, is really just a REST API. So you can access it from graph.microsoft.com v1.0, which is our sort of release version. And then when you want to work with the person who's signed in, you just access through the /me command. And in this case, for this next meeting intent, that first thing that I kicked it off with, what I really want to do is go grab somebody's calendar, go find out for the next day, are they supposed to be somewhere? I'm going to go essentially use a very simple REST-based request to go fetch that information. And then when I'm done, I'm going to go parse that result with some parsing code over here and actually convert it into a human English response that says your next meeting is at this time in this place. So what you can see is Graph is essentially just a REST API. And what I've done here is I've wrapped it inside of just some standard code to make REST requests. The other thing I just wanted to show you very quickly was when I did that search for Ben, I called this API called /me/people. And the people API is that insights API that takes a look at all of your different sources of people, your email, your contacts, your Active Directory, and it creates that sorted list of people that are relevant to a particular person. So in this case, again, it's just a very simple REST request. I'm going to go make that to /me/people. It's going to go get all of my items. It's going to go return them back. And then it's going to go send back a prompt that says, which person are you actually interested in? So just to give you a feel for what it's like to code with Microsoft Graph, it's just REST. OK. So we think that Microsoft Graph can really be the heart of a number of different applications. Certainly as you're building your web applications or if you're building device applications, you can call Microsoft Graph and get at that sort of key organizational data. When you think about it, almost any enterprise application, at some point you're going to need to work with people. And at some point you're probably going to want to work with tasks. And at some point you're probably going to want to work with files inside of SharePoint. And so Graph really provides that gateway to go do it. The other thing that Microsoft Graph has is it has something called webhooks. So going beyond just REST APIs, a webhook is a notification so that when something changes in a system, your web services will get called and you can actually go kick off some actions. So there's webhooks, for example, for when files inside of SharePoint get changed. And so using those webhooks, you can kick off business processes such that anytime something updates inside of a SharePoint folder, you can go maybe process that document or go kick off a workflow. You can do that using Microsoft Graph if you want to go develop it. Of course, you can also use Flow, but if you're a developer, those webhooks in Microsoft Graph make a great choice. And it is our ambition to have Microsoft Graph across Office 365, across Windows and enterprise mobility and security. It's still a journey. If you're familiar with SharePoint development, you know that we have very, very deep SharePoint REST APIs that were developed over the span of 5 to 10 years, essentially. And so we have APIs for SharePoint and Microsoft Graph, but they are a subset of what you'll see in SharePoint REST or SharePoint CSOM. We're always working to bring more APIs into Microsoft Graph, but what you will see is sometimes there will be more data that's just available inside of the existing like CSOM or REST APIs. So use Microsoft Graph where you can, but be advised sometimes there will be more detailed APIs on a product-by-product basis. The other thing that we have is that Microsoft Graph has SDKs across a number of different platforms. Of course, you can always call REST from almost any modern platform. But if you want sort of additional IntelliSense and additional tools, we have SDKs not just for Windows and JavaScript, but for platforms like Java and Ruby on Rails and those kinds of things. Now, going beyond Microsoft Graph, we realize that there's this common activity that a lot more companies are doing, which is they're trying to use AI and bring them to everyday tasks and everyday processes inside of an organization. So a lot of times what companies want to do is take data at scale, lots and lots of data across people, across groups, bring them into maybe Azure, make sure that they've got secure processes around them, but then start to use AI to go compute some insights from them. So if you want to build a better CRM, for example, you want to make it more relevant, you want to help find affinities between your salespeople and your contacts, you can bring some of the communications that you have in email, you can run AI against them, and hopefully you can find some insights that will make your sales force that much more effective. And so a lot of times people want to get at the data inside of Microsoft Graph. They want to get at the list of people. They want to get a list of maybe some of those communications, some of those emails, and they want to start to assess it for patterns. Now, of course, it's very important to make sure that this is compliant and well managed, and always the data is in tight control of your IT department. So there's also a need to make sure that there's compliance throughout this process for working with it. And so to support this, we came up with a new tool that we have called Microsoft Graph Data Connect. So Microsoft Graph Data Connect goes beyond a REST API to actually provide a data pipeline that takes the data that you have inside of Office 365 and actually move it inside of Azure. In so doing, there's a number of different compliance tools and management tools to make sure that the data is always well governed. It is its own pipeline, so it's something you don't have to build yourself. It will update the data as data changes. So this becomes a hyper-efficient way to get the data into a shape that you can actually start to make analyses from it. So with Graph Data Connect, we think that this is kind of a great complement. It's a data pipeline for working with your data between Office 365 and Azure. So just to show you a little bit of how some customers are using this, it's probably a better way to explain it than I could. We work with a company called Talentsoft. Talentsoft makes CRM software in Europe. They're fairly popular. And they're always looking for ways to help their customers and the employees and organizations more effective by finding affinities, helping people create better teams. And to do that, they needed to leverage some AI to actually look at people's skills and affinities and actually bring them together and make them more effective. So Talentsoft is using Microsoft Graph Data Connect to start to do this with a customer. So
Talentsoft is the European leader of cloud-based talent management and learning software. We are working with Joe, designing an entire new way to recruit and manage highly creative individuals. It's fully based on Microsoft technology.
Dior is one of the most recognized luxury brands in the world. The fashion industry moves so quickly, we need to be very agile so that we can really lead the change in the fashion business. My biggest challenge is to nurture creative individuals and to help them work together as a team.
Microsoft Graph Data Connect allows us to get data at scale and to identify skills and collaboration patterns across employees within an organization. We are going to use AI machine learning plus data from Microsoft Graph Data Connect to build new teams.
Technology and fashion are two different universes. When we bring them together, it's very exciting. The future for me is to leverage all those data from Microsoft Graph to create even more opportunities for Joe.
Thanks to Microsoft, this technology is going to help foster collaboration, discovering talents, and support the work of this iconic brand.
The future at Dior is exciting for me because we have the ability to continue to develop all these talented people working with so much passion for Dior.
So using graph data at scale to start to observe trends and hopefully build more affinities to build more effective teams. Of course, in concert with their employees and making sure that the employees are also in control of that as well. So that's just a use case for Microsoft Graph Data Connect. Okay, so that's a little bit about Microsoft Graph. I mean, you'll probably hear a lot about it. You've probably heard a lot about it, but we do think it's kind of just a great way to actually access key data that will make your applications more contextually aware. Now, Windows 10 is just another area of Microsoft 365 where we think there's a huge opportunity to build more rich applications natively on top of Windows to take advantage of a number of different Windows capabilities. Now, in this case, I have a very simple demo of an application that will actually go and connect to Microsoft Graph. So this application brings us back to healthcare clinics. So I've been a lawyer, now I'm a healthcare clinician again. What this application does is, first of all, it's got just a really great presentation style because it's able to use kind of the native capabilities of Windows to kind of present a very fluid and engaging user experience. In this case, I'm going to start by signing in. Windows has some deeply integrated native support for signing into Azure Active Directory. So in this case, I can just click sign in. It's going to use my credentials on Windows to go add me to this application. And so when it opens up, I'm going to get this custom experience with a number of different controls. I want to go focus on the Seattle Clinic. The Seattle Clinic, when you first see this, one of the things you'll see is a map control here. So Windows as a developer platform has a number of engaging controls, like this map control here that can do, for example, 3D in a very flexible and quick fashion. I was actually a program manager on this control, so I'm a little impartial to it. But you can do things like we've got sort of world-class 3D aerial imagery, but this is just one example of a control that exists when you're building a Windows application that can help you build more rich and integrated experiences. But the thing I wanted to show you was that we also have tools for connecting to Microsoft Graph. So in this case, I've got a task management tool. This connects to my tasks via Microsoft Graph so that if I'm in this clinic and I need to go order more gauze, like this, I can click add. This will get added to my queue. It'll go back to Microsoft Graph. It will go add it in a consistent location so that I can act on it. We have APIs, and we're working for more control. So for example, one of the ideas is that you can embed Microsoft Teams inside of this as well. The final thing that we actually have, and this is exposed through the Windows UWP Toolkit, Community Toolkit, is we have controls that natively integrate with things like OneDrive. So in this case, I've got all my files stored for this clinic in a group in Office 365. And one of the things I can do is actually look at some X-ray files. And so X-ray files are kind of a custom file format. But because OneDrive actually knows and understands that format, I can leverage OneDrive's capabilities through Microsoft Graph, bring it into my UWP application, and create these rich experiences where I can just seamlessly look at these X-ray files as well. So just an idea of how you can build these engaging experiences. We have a number of different controls like maps, like graph-connected controls that you can use to go build custom UWP applications. Now, of course, a lot of you are building web applications. You might want to build for Windows natively if you want to take advantage of natural input, if you want to take advantage of things like mixed reality or the device ecosystem. There's a huge footprint on IoT. So if you're coding for devices that are like a Raspberry Pi or smaller, you can do that as well. If you want to take advantage of high-end graphics or AI capabilities, there's also native on-box capabilities with Windows that you can go build with. And of course, as I mentioned, Windows development is the spectrum that spans across native technologies like WPF and UWP through Xamarin over into React as well. Now, the final way to actually go extend Microsoft 365 probably needs no introduction, which is a very common way to go extend across Office 365 is to extend SharePoint. And the main way to do this is through something called SharePoint Framework. So SharePoint Framework really allows you to take JavaScript code that you're writing, go introduce it into SharePoint, and then go build custom web parts and extensions for it. So I'm not going to go into SharePoint Framework because there's a ton of sessions here. A lot of you are probably very familiar with it. But just keep in mind, SharePoint Framework can now also be used to go build Teams applications. We're hoping that we can bring it to more different types of clients as well to make it more effective to develop with. So in some regards, SharePoint is actually in a special place inside of Microsoft 365 because it really becomes a host for applications across those different Office 365 and Microsoft 365 applications as well. So with that, hopefully you've seen a little bit about how to maybe build more people-centric apps by integrating the tools that people are working with, building applications for Teams and inside of Outlook, by bringing in things like Microsoft Graph into your existing applications, adding more context and richness to them. And so we hope that with Microsoft 365, these are just a really great set of tools and recipes in your toolbox for building more engaging applications and hoping to make people more effective and more efficient at their collaboration. So with that, that was kind of my whirlwind tour. Hopefully you've taken away some recipes and some ideas for how you can build those more efficient processes. Please fill out your session evaluation. I really value the feedback. I've tried some different things, so if you thought parts were boring, please let me know. I'd love to know that feedback. My email is mikeam@microsoft.com, so if you've got questions, feel free to email me. We have a number of different training resources. We have blog resources. We're trying to kind of build up these kind of cross Microsoft 365 scenarios. And of course, we have a number of different Twitter handles, and we have weekly community calls as well. Finally, we also have an Office 365 developer program. So there's newsletters. There's a free Office 365 tenancy you can use. So it's a great way to jumpstart your development as well. So with that, thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Thank you.